Each week on the Oklahoma News Report, we bring you an extended conversation on the issues and challenges facing Oklahomans. Last Friday, we gathered together the local leader of the Black Lives Matter organization, a chief of police, and an African-American historian and author to discuss race relations. The conversation was frank, but not contentious. Not everyone agreed on everything, but they did so with respect and they listened to one another. And so tonight, Moderator Susan Cadot presents part 2 of that continuing conversation.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Rich. We are back for the second part of our discussion on community policing and racism with our wonderful panel of guests. We have Reverend Sheree Dickerson, who is the founder and executive director of Black Lives Matter in Oklahoma, one of many hats she wears in her work in the community, in the state, and in the city of Oklahoma City. We also have Hannibal Johnson, who is an attorney, author, and independent consultant who specializes in diversity and inclusion, cultural competence issues, and nonprofit governance. And finally, we have Chief Brendan Claibs with the Midwest City Police Department, who comes to us with decades of experience in policing, 20 years as a chief, 20 plus years as a chief, FBI training, Secret Service training, all qualified to take us further down the road in our discussion on racism and community policing and how we bridge the gap. So, Hannibal, is there some responsibility on the other side, on the community side, to also work with police departments? I know many Black parents are having that conversation with their kiddos, right, of how to interact, but is there something that is inherent that's not being done on the community side to also understand and relate to police officers?
There absolutely is. I mean, I think one of the things I've been working with the police department here for the last dozen years or so is building trust. They're building these relationships. And part of the building the relationships has to do with demystifying policing. What do police do and why? How can we relate to police in a way that diffuses rather than intensifies particular situations? But the flip side of the coin is important too. The police need to understand, and this has again been proven by scholarly studies, Black men, for example, are perceived to be more dangerous than white men in these academic studies. So what does that suggest? That suggests that the police, absent training, might react in ways different and more consequential when they deal with a Black man than when they deal with a white man. So it's important that both sides of the equation appreciate the potential consequentiality of these interactions between community and police and do what they can to diffuse any possible conflict. That has to do with sharing information. That has to do with acknowledging implicit biases and working on those implicit biases. And it has to do with constructive engagement.
Chief, did you want to answer that?
I just want to say, I think Hannibal hit the nail on the head. You know, recruiting is probably the key for us, recruiting qualified candidates to be police officers. Training is the ultimate requirement. And, you know, we need to represent the community that we serve. Diversity is so important. My best recruiters are officers. We tell them every 6 months, identify somebody that you would want to be a police officer you would serve with. But nobody wants to be a police officer now. Very difficult for us to recruit. You know, I have 28% minority population in Midwest City. We don't represent the community we serve, and we try actively to do that, but it's very difficult. But Hannibal's correct. Recruiting is a key, and training is an absolute. And yes, I agree. We admit there are implicit biases. There's no question about it. And we admit that we have to have a better trust among our community. But we're working very hard towards that. I think Sheree can testify that. She knows me personally. I haven't met Hannibal before, but, you know, we do things in Midwest City I'm very proud of. And one of that is I think we do listen to learn from our public.
So Reverend, we've been talking about this term implicit bias. Will you explain for our viewers and for me who may not have a full understanding of what that is?
So we are using the term implicit bias. It means that it is inherent for someone to actually have a bias or a prejudice based on the ethnicity or race of a person in this particular conversation. But we're using very cordial language. Implicit bias takes the sting out of the systems of racism and white supremacy and the violence that happens within these types of systems. And so I think we have to make sure language is important and how we identify it. We have to be very authentic and yes, have those uncomfortable conversations and call it what it is and just not make it just like African-American communities are not a monolith, nor are the systems that work against us.
So it is uncomfortable, and I'm just going to chime in with my own thing here. It's uncomfortable sometimes for white folks to have those uncomfortable conversations because you don't want to offend. You think you're not racist, but when you talk about implicit bias, it engenders self-examination, and you want to ask questions, but you don't want to offend anyone. So it's really hard to begin those conversations, right? And Hannibal, I'll let you take that one. How do you start?
Yeah. So my first thought is, if it's difficult to have those conversations with your Black friends, then you may not have Black friends. You have Black acquaintances.
Yep.
So you need to think about expanding your circle and building friendships that involve some intimacy, where you can talk about these uncomfortable things in a way that you know you're safe and supported. That's what I would say first.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you here because not all Black folks think alike. They all have different variations of how they feel about these issues.
Absolutely, but gaining the perspective of at least one Black person would be helpful to you. I mean, if you have a broader circle and you can talk to multiple people, that's obviously the best thing to do. But you got to have at least a few people, unlike you in terms of race, that are intimate, that are in your circle, that you can talk about the hard things with. We'll never make any progress if we don't talk about the stuff that's difficult to talk about, that makes us uncomfortable.
So, Reverend, I just had an image of someone going, okay, look, I need a Black friend. Will you be my friend? I don't even know how that. So maybe you need to get involved in things. I don't know.
Right. If you only have one Black friend, you are upholding the systems of racism or white supremacy, because as Hannibal said, we're not a monolith. And so you do not have the actual scope. If you only have one, then you need to honor their experience. A lot of my white friends over the years, and we've had to have these difficult conversations, have said, I did not realize that I was racist or I had systems of that. And they stigmatize what racism or being racist is. And it's simply about the power structure. Those in Black and brown skin do not have the ability, and it is intentional and deliberate to oppress and suppress our progress as a people.
So, Chief, let me turn to you in this. Does it become something of a personal development, not only on any leader's part, but on the team's part in your police organization? Is it not just something they do at work, but they need to integrate into their personal lives, those relationships that are important to understanding?
Oh, I believe so. I mean, I think, I'm a good Southern Baptist. At my church, they preach about how you should sit down with at your dinner table with someone who's different than you are to learn about those different cultures. I'm very proud by the fact that I was recognized by the Martin Luther King Prayer Breakfast here in Midwest City. I received the Clara Looper Community Award for my work with the African American community. So these things, I've got a bunch of African American Black friends. I work with a bunch of African Americans. I came from Lawton, Oklahoma, which was a racist town, and even Midwest City was considered a sunset town in the 60s. And I don't know if your viewers know what that is, but that was if after dark, if you were African American, you weren't supposed to be inside the city limits. And that's changed drastically here in Midwest City. And so you're right. We've got to continue these critical conversations, as Hannibal calls them, which is what I call them too. And the other thing is, the community needs to work with us by the fact that we have police citizens academies where people can come in and learn what we deal with on a daily basis. We have a simulator machine that's open that people can be put in critical situations and learn how police officers make split-second decisions to not only protect themselves, but to protect the public. Police officers have an extremely difficult job. in the 21st century. President Obama came out with policing in the 21st century, had 6 pillars. And since 2015, African Americans killed by police officers has been reduced by 23%. So we're doing something right. We have high profile cases that happen on a daily basis across the United States. It stems back to training. It stems back to the individual officers and how they react to situations. The bottom line is being a police officer is extremely difficult. Nobody wants to do the job. We deal with all of society's ill wills, all the way from mental health, domestic violence, suicide, homicides. We go home. I'm worried about the mental health of my police officers. And so we've got a very robust peer support group. We also have a very robust employee assistance program, because suicide is the number one killer of police officers, not the public. And it's because we deal with the issues we deal with.
Hannibal, what do you think about that? Is it tough to be a police officer? Should they all just step away because it's stressful? I mean,
yes, it's tough to be a police officer, but it's tough to be a nurse, and it's tough to be a lot of things. I think now to talk at least briefly about this whole thing, this movement to defund the police. First of all, I think it's been exploited and misinterpreted, first of all, because I don't know anybody who wants to defund the police in the sense of taking away all their money. When I first heard the phrase, I thought it related to looking at what the police do and seeing if there are aspects of what they do that could be better done by somebody else. Like the chief, for example, mentioned all the mental health things that the police have to do in terms of engaging with the community. Is it the case that there's somebody better to do that than the police, so that frees up the police officers' time to do other things that are at the core of their mission? That's what that conversation, at least initially, in terms of defunding the police, was about. Unfortunately, people have used that to suggest that there are lots and lots of people, particularly progressive people, who want to eliminate the police so that we don't have police. That's absurd. I don't know anybody who wants to do that.
Chief, your officers undoubtedly have to deal with mental health issues daily, I'm sure. Would that be something that would be nice to have experts dealing with that instead of police officers? Well,
the first answer is you need to get 100% or majority of your officers trained in crisis intervention. And we've done that here in Midwest City. The other thing that we've done, I'm very proud of, is when Terry White was the commissioner over Oklahoma mental health and substance abuse, we created a program where we have an embedded mental health clinician here in Midwest City who is available to help with our clientele that come through our municipal jail. In Midwest City, we've responded to 71,000 calls a year, over 100 mental health calls a month. So it's an average of 3 to 4. And some of those mental health calls can last up to 8 hours. My agency has transported people to Wichita Falls, Texas, because there's no beds available. But, I appreciate Hannibal and Sheree's comments that it is a profession, it's a career choice, but there is no career like being a police officer. We have to make a split-second decision whether we have to take a life or not. And nobody wants to do that. If anybody says they want to get in law enforcement and take a life, they shouldn't be in law enforcement. I've never heard a police officer say that. We, as I said, are the gateway for all of society's ill wills. We're the first ones called. We respond to everything. We see the bad, the ugly things nobody else is supposed to deal with. And I tell you, it is different for police officers. And I've been one for 42 years. And I've been a police officer and gone through the ranks. And now I'm police chief. And I feel for these young policemen coming into the field is what they're going to have to deal with. And what's it going to be like in 5 to 10 years from now? The only way that we're going to be successful, as Sheree and as Hannibal have said, is build that trust with our community. We are working very hard. I know my counterparts throughout different agencies, including Tulsa, where Hannibal's from, are doing the best that we can. But we need reciprocal behavior on behalf of our community. We can't do it by ourselves. It's got to be a two-way conversation. And so that's why I encourage, go ride with the police officer. Come see what we do so you'll understand us so we can understand you.
Reverend, we talked about the Black community not being a monolith. Do you get pushback from within your own organization for trying to reach out and create relationships with law enforcement agencies?
I don't look at as pushbacks? Do we have robust conversations? And are there those within my communities that don't have the same perspectives or would like to see different strategies used? Of course. And we encourage each person to stand in their own autonomy in doing that and understand that it is very different for each person. And it's not the same just because we're in Black skin. They always ask me to remember that the institution of law enforcement was originally created to continue the enslavement of people in Black skin. And that is where a lot of the distrust and the pain and the trauma comes from. And so they push me to ask for a different type of evolution and acknowledgement from law enforcement agencies. And I totally honor and respect that. And we have been able to implement a lot of that information to try to, we're just asking for us to stop losing our lives with interactions with police, stop killing us. And so they ask about training and that. I don't know what training you implement to teach any person to honor the humanity of another.
I think it has to happen on a personal level. It's not just a work thing. It becomes part of who you are.
Right.
And we all can evolve, personally. So I do want to mention that, Reverend, you were instrumental in keeping the Black Lives Matter protests in Oklahoma peaceful last year, and you even had your group pick up the trash. So what we see on national news, I think Oklahoma is a little more respectful in their even in their protests, even in the disruption. I think we're more respectful with everyone here, at least so far, is what I've seen. All right, final comments. I would like to start with the chief. Any final comments for folks that you'd like to be the main takeaway for them from this conversation?
Well, obviously, I have a different perspective because I'm speaking from the law enforcement world. But I would pledge to your viewers and the people in different communities is when they have interaction with police, comply. If you comply, I would say probably 99.9% of these interactions would end up peacefully, I would hope. I'll also say that, violence and hate in response to issues in our community are not healthy in any way. And, we've seen it across the United States. We saw it at the Capitol. We've seen it in different cities, but I'm proud of Oklahoma. We have had some issues here, but I'm proud for the most part that when we do have a difference, we try to do it peacefully and we try to have those conversations. I know in Midwest City we try. I know my other police chiefs across the state of Oklahoma are trying to do the same thing. And so I appreciate programs like this to give a better insight as to what we're dealing with from the law enforcement perspective. And I appreciate Hannibal's comments and certainly Sheree's comments too.
Hannibal, final words, final thoughts. What's the takeaway?
So just a phrase that comes to mind immediately is constructive engagement. If we're going to make progress, if we're going to make our communities safe and secure, there has to be constructive engagement on both sides. Reciprocity, rights and responsibilities on the part of the community, rights and responsibilities on the part of the police. To the extent that we acknowledge that and we work toward that, we're going to be much better poised to create those kinds of communities that we really want.
Reverend, what's the takeaway for you? What would you like folks to remember from this dialogue?
I would hope that three very important points. What you do for us, without us, you do to us. Also, when we speak about compliance, maybe we also need to be looking at a change in policy and procedure. Because many times, even when a person in Black and brown skin has been seen as, has been complying, their life was still lost in that interaction. And so I don't think that that is indicative of it being just an issue of compliance. And expecting civility from a demographic or group or community that has constant violence thrust upon them from the systems that are supposed to protect and support seems like a very unfair and unrealistic expectation.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. clearly more conversations will be had in the future. I want to thank all three of you for giving us your time and your insight to share not only with us, but with our viewers. And I wish all of you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.